Oh, hi! You caught me recovering from a brutal car accident. Speaking of extreme violence, let's talk about Dick Tracy.
Comic tropes. Comic tropes.
Hello! Welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Chester Gould. What do you know about him? Well, he was born in November of 1900 in the small Oklahoma town of Pawnee. He actually had four grandparents, all four grandparents that were pioneers and settlers of Oklahoma. He was fascinated with cartooning and drawing, and by the time he was 24, he was already working as a cartoonist at the Chicago Evening American. In 1931, Chester Gould invented his memorable character, police detective Dick Tracy, and continued making daily comics about him through 1977, at which point he handed the strip over to new creators. Gould was fascinated with real-life police forensics, and frequently took classes to keep up to date with current procedures and techniques. Chester Gould was a massive proponent of police rights, and he actually started to irritate his readers with how much he would proselytize and praise police and how great they were throughout his comics in the 1950s and 60s. A good example, in 1966, the Arizona Supreme Court settled the case of Miranda Rights. You've all heard of the Miranda Rights. That's when in, TV and film we see the police saying you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, telling criminals things like that. But even though those are rights that we are all granted under the Constitution, Chester Gould was like, no way, this is terrible. All it's going to do is make work harder for the police. I guess so, Chester. A lot of people will remember Dick Tracy for its colorful villains, or even its sci-fi inventions like the two-way wrist radio that Dick Tracy would wear. But what they tend to forget is within those first 2 or 3 decades, Dick Tracy was much more grounded and extremely violent. From 1931 to 1964, Dick Tracy's stories were pretty grounded crime stories. In 1964, Dick Tracy suddenly went to the moon, where he met the moon people, including Moon Maid, who married his adopted son. Things got weird then, but until that point, it was all about Tracy using real detective work to track down organized crime, hitmen, con men, bootleggers, and other criminals. And about 9 times out of 10, they'd either be shot to death by Dick Tracy and his team, or they'd end up facing a grisly or karmically appropriate death. Gould improvised his stories, but tried to keep his story arcs with a new villain limited to 11 or 12 weeks, at which point the villain was arrested or permanently killed off. In very rare cases, he'd create an especially popular villain like Big Boy or Flattop, who stuck around about an additional 4 weeks. But what I want to do today is focus on that violence that I was talking about. I want to take a look at 10 especially grisly and violent deaths in Dick Tracy that happened within the first 2 decades of the stories. And while I do that, I figure it'd be appropriate to drink this entire bottle of Walking Dead wine. By the way, when we're done with those 10 deaths, I'm going to have a special guest, an actual villain from the Dick Tracy comics, visit us. So stick around and let's get to it. Boris Arson was a relatively memorable early villain. He was a bank robber that Tracy arrested. But then Boris stole the gun of Tracy's goofy sidekick Pat Patton and escaped. His sister Zora aided him, having visited him in jail while disguised as a man. Boris and Zora go on the run to their old friend Cutie Diamond, who had been hiding out in the Ozark Mountains for years. While he brags to them about how he has trained wildcats to protect his compound, Tracy and the cops show up. The cats keep him from entering Cutie Diamond's caves, but Tracy runs a hose from his car exhaust to the cave to suffocate the criminals. Zora and Cutie Diamond run out, guns blazing, and are shot to pieces by the police, dying instantly. Boris tries to hide deep in the cave, so Dick Tracy correctly guesses where he'd be and shoots a Tommy gun through the rock wall, killing Boris. Not bad. So long, Cutie Diamond and the Arson siblings. You know, Gould's stories always seem to have unrepentant villains. So basically, they had what they had coming to them, you know? the police were always justified in killing them. And so that said, yeah, Zora Arson and Cutie Diamond, they came out shooting at the police, so they got what's coming to them. But when Dick Tracy just shoots through the wall and kills Boris, who's hiding, I don't know, man, that one's questionable. The man named Chrome was an assassin who killed with weaponized toys. Ultimately, his girlfriend turned on him, so he electrocuted her. Then he tried to escape by forcing a snowplow driver at gunpoint to cross a frozen lake. The snowplow fell through the ice. Chrome fell into the icy water and escaped the snowplow. He hid from Dick Tracy and the police, who had been in close pursuit, by waiting in a snowbank while Tracy and the cops saved the driver of the snowplow. Having to wait until the police passed and having a handgun just out of reach, he quickly succumbed to the elements and froze to death. If Dick Tracy doesn't shoot someone, you could pretty much just guarantee that the villain died in an even more terrible way. For Gould, this was karmic justice. If you lived a terrible life, you were gonna have a terrible death. That's just how it was. Prune Face was a Nazi saboteur, running an operation in America to develop a deadly nerve gas. Eventually, Tracy started getting close to the operation, so Prune Face went on the run. When his photo was published in a newspaper, he murdered a dog for its sweater to wear over his face. He had broken his leg and held a doctor hostage to fix it. Ironically, the dead dog belonged to this doctor who recognized the sweater. The doctor left clues that led Dick Tracy to them. Prune Face ran and hid in a remote house. It was the middle of winter, so Dick Tracy disconnected the power and let Prune Face freeze to death. That death is mostly implied. It kind of happens off-panel, but later Prune Face's wife tried to get revenge for that death, so it happened. The only reason I explain that is that, Gould had no problem killing off his villains, but once he handed the strip off to other writers, sometimes they found ways to bring those characters back. I just consider that like, yeah, I guess that's canon, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Chester Gould's work, and he had no problem permanently killing off his villains. And this is also about the time when he started drawing his villains looking grotesque, or maybe they had some sort of really weird mannerism. There was always something that made them extra distinctive at this point. In 1942, Dick Tracy began tracking down BB Eyes, a bootlegger who specialized in selling stolen rubber tires. This was during World War II when rubber was at a premium. Eventually, Dick Tracy and Pat Patton tracked BB Eyes down and chased him. BB Eyes jumped onto a garbage scow passing by on the river. But he had bad luck as the garbage scow immediately dumped its garbage and BB Eyes ended up trapped under some old rubber tires where he drowned. That's probably the best example of karmic justice. I mean, the guy sold tires and then he was killed under the weight of old tires. So yeah, great, perfect karmic justice. I'm just amused that Dick Tracy went up against a bad guy whose whole gimmick was selling stolen tires. I think if that happened in today's day and age, Dick Tracy would be going after guys that sold emulated video games on eBay. That's a pretty good one. Wow. 13.5% alcohol by volume. Yeah, well, it actually tastes pretty good. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon from California. 2016 is the vintage. It's not bad. 88 Keys was a popular jazz piano player. He was also a killer for hire who accepted a contract by a wife to kill her millionaire husband. When Keys' girlfriend found out about the murder, he killed her and stored her in a piano that he put into storage. Dick Tracy found out about that and tracked Keys down, who went on the run with the now wealthy widow. 88 Keys knocked out the widow and left her in their car on the train tracks where she was crushed. 88 Keys was chased by Tracy and ultimately hid out on a farm in a tool shed. Tracy knew 88 Keys was armed and offered him the chance to surrender. When 88 Keys didn't immediately answer, Tracy just shot the tool shed up, killing 88 Keys. 88 Keys was memorable not just for his death, but for the fact that he killed 3 people in his storyline. And then ultimately Dick Tracy just shoots him to death. It's pretty straightforward. But Chester Gould didn't want the reader to have any sympathy for these characters. He wanted the readers to enjoy seeing the villain get their comeuppance, which they always did. Flattop is probably Dick Tracy's most memorable and popular enemy. He was a contract killer hired by black marketers to kill Dick Tracy. He failed in his assassination attempt, and the police were involved in a very long chase, while Flattop continually eluded them. Eventually, he ended up in a shootout with Dick Tracy and the police, where he was shot in the neck and captured. However, he quickly escaped and tried to hide under a replica of the Santa Maria boat in the city's lagoon. While hiding in the boat's underpinnings, he stepped on a rusty nail, got stuck, and drowned. It's a grisly death, but it's super memorable, and Flattop, he sort of kept coming back, but of course Flattop himself was not the one coming back. Of course? I don't know what I'm saying. I'm getting a little tipsy. But basically, Chester Gould invented all sorts of family members. There was a Flattop Jr., there was his wife, I think he had a daughter named Angel Top. It's hard to remember exactly which ones Chester Gould created, but he created a bunch of them. The Flattop family just kept coming after Dick Tracy. But you know what? Ultimately, Flattop was felled by that arch enemy for all of us, the rusty nail. Oh, damn you, rusty nail. The Brow was one of the cruelest Dick Tracy villains. He was a Nazi spy who was found out by two women named the Summers sisters. He forced them to work for him, trapping one's leg in a machine he built full of spikes that clamped in tight and kept her as a hostage. Eventually, the other one obtained a gun and turned the tables on the Brow, knocking him back, and he got his head stuck in the spike machine. He wrenched it out but could barely see from the blood flow. Brow forced the taxicab with the women off a bridge, killing them, and he went on the run. He stumbled into a gravel pit run by Gravel Gertie, a hideous woman who helped Brow recuperate. He couldn't see her until he was healed, at which point he was horrified and he ran, but both of them were soon arrested. In jail, Gertie stole an officer's gun and threw it to the Brow. While he fumbled with the safety and handcuffs, Dick Tracy threw a bottle of ink at him that knocked him out of a window and got him impaled on a flagpole. He had it coming, I guess. I guess I'm out of witty jokes at this point. He had it coming. There you go. Shaky was a con man who essentially roofied an actress with some sort of drugs and then tried to kill her. She survived and went to the police, so Dick Tracy chased him down. Shaky hid in a hole in the docks, but breakers quickly came in, blocking the hole and freezing over. He quickly suffocated. The folks that were just shot by Dick Tracy pretty much seem to have had it pretty good at this point, right? Anyway, Shaky's death actually kicked off a longer story arc that was really cool. His stepdaughter, Breathless Mahoney, came across his money and went on the run. There was another interesting villain called Itchy in that story. It was a really good story arc. It was a pretty long one, too. Gargles was a bootlegger who sold cheap mouthwash that was just water and cinnamon or mint. He'd forced stores to carry it, but insisted on only using the good stuff for himself. Eventually, Dick Tracy started chasing him, and he fell off the walkway in a glass factory, impaling himself on shards of plate glass windows. You'd think that the criminals in this city might eventually learn to just give themselves up when Dick Tracy came after him. I mean, the newspaper's obituary pages must have just been like 10 pages of criminals that were either shot by Dick Tracy or died in really gruesome ways while running away from him. It's like, just give yourself up. Just go to jail at this point. Mumbles was a guitarist who would steal from wealthy socialites along with his quartet. His girlfriend broke off their engagement, so Mumbles and his band stole her car to go joyriding, and they killed a traffic cop. Dick Tracy eventually tracked Mumbles, his gang, and his girlfriend down to a yacht that they planned to escape on. Mumbles had plans to kill them all with dynamite and fake his death, but when Tracy got on the yacht, Mumbles got on a small dinghy and was lost at sea where he appeared to drown. However, in a rare case of reversing a death, Gould revealed Mumbles had survived 8 years later. Mumbles was trying to steal a buried treasure in a swamp where he fist-fought Dick Tracy. The tide came in, and Mumbles, weighted down by his treasure, drowned for real. The moral of the story seems to be don't trust musicians. Anyway, if you haven't read Dick Tracy, I actually do recommend this. The comic strips in the 30s and 40s were a lot different than the comic strips that you would see today. they tended to have really great artists, first of all, because newspapers paid very well back then. And they also didn't feel the need to repeat information. They thought that people were going to read these strips every single day. So when it's compiled, it actually makes for pretty good reading. And IDW has put together some great editions where they basically do a year at a time, which will generally feature 2 or 3 villains. It's honestly pretty good reading. Anyway, I promised you that we would meet a Dick Tracy villain, so let me take one last swig and we will meet him. Alright folks, I'd love for you to meet my guest, Dolan Dummyface. Dolan, tell them about yourself.
Hi there, I'm Dolan Dummyface, and what I do is sell comics, but really, it's just some drawings that I staple onto old Sports Illustrated magazines. What's that?
Oh no.
Look at me. I'm not just Infotron the helpful robot. I'm a hero like Dick Tracy.
Oh! He'll live. Let's see if we have any fan art this week. I have one piece of fan art this week. This comes from Vincent Kings, and it's me as the Marvel supervillain MODOK, or as Vincent suggests, KODOK, critical organism designed only for killing. Well, I don't know about the killing part, but I absolutely love it. Thanks, Vincent. Folks, remember, if you want to send in any fan art, as long as it's somehow related to this specific show, just send it to this address, and I'll be sure to show everything I get, as long as it's related to the show, and if you include anything like social media or a website link, I'll include that for you too, no problem. Also, I'll randomly draw a gachapon that I picked up in Japan. Since there was only one person this week, Vincent, you win some sort of Power Rangers themed gachapon. So hopefully you or someone you know will enjoy that. Folks, I had a lot of fun reviewing old comic strips, and I'll be honest, I am sweltering right now. I can barely catch my breath after having pretty much a full bottle of wine, doing an episode in the middle of summer with lights on. I have to turn off the air conditioning so that you don't hear the background hum, and then I put on the Infotron suit. Surprise, he's not real, and I'm just melting. I'm literally just dying here. I gotta take off. I'm rambling, but it's because I had a lot of fun and I like talking to all of you. So thank you very much for watching, and until next time, keep reading comics.